Welcome to What's the Point? A question we should all be asking ourselves, and the podcast by brand architect Bill Ellis.
Hi, it's another episode of What's the Point, and thank you for joining us. Oftentimes when I'm working with people professionally or even on a personal basis, a lot of times the question becomes not what's the point, but what's next. A lot of people find that quandary of when I've finished this, what's next? Well, today's guest is a living example of how to address that question. And we're going to hear some really interesting, exciting, I think, empowering information today from my guest, Deborah Hammett. Hello, Deborah.
Hi,
Welcome.
it's great to be here. I love the theme of the podcast. What's the point? Because if we can't identify why we're doing something, we shouldn't be doing it, right?
Well, thank you so much, because that's exactly the intent of the podcast. Uh, because I base this on people finding, discovering, evolving, embracing, living their purpose, and doing that through hearing stories of other people, my guests, who are doing exactly that. And Deborah, you are doing exactly that. So let me tell you just a little bit about Deborah. Deborah currently is the author of a book called Young Salt at 60. And what does that mean? Well, we're going to have her explain that right now.
Well, I've always heard of old salts, people who have sailed their whole lives, who know the sea, who know boats inside out, often fishermen and boat captains, and they're old salty dogs. And I'm not an old salty dog. In fact, I've never sailed until I was 60 years old. So once I retired, I started watching YouTube videos and seeing these young kids who were embarking on this lifestyle of living aboard a boat and traveling to exotic places and spear fishing and having the time of their lives.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, that's really pretty cool. So I started learning more and more about it, and eventually started taking some sailing lessons and got into it. And now I live aboard my boat, Maia, and I've been sailing up and down the East Coast for a couple of years.
Well, that's a whole lot in that one little soundbite, and we're going to get into that a little bit deeper. Let me start by letting the listeners know this. Deborah got interested in sailing at the tender age of 60. Prior to that, I'm going to get a little bit to the starting point. Deborah's been an educator for three and a half decades prior to retiring. So I want to find out a little bit about that aspect of your life prior to what you're doing now. But we'll definitely come back to what you're doing now because it's fascinating to me. Tell me, Deborah, about what got you started? What got you started in education, and what drove you in that area?
Well, when I was young and in my early 20s, I had a little bit of a messiah complex, and I wanted to do something to change society. And I really thought that the best way to do that would be to help kids and empower them to do whatever it is they had a passion for doing, and to have the basic skills they needed, but most importantly, the confidence they needed. So I decided to be an elementary school teacher, and I went to state school and waitressed my way through and got my teaching degree. And over the summer, I found Martha's Vineyard Island. A friend of mine were looking for jobs and a place to live for the summer, and we drove up the East Coast and came upon signs that said islands. And we said, oh, that sounds good. So we went to Martha's Vineyard, and as soon as I got there, and this was in 1983, as soon as I got there, I fell in love with the place and decided to live there. So I went back and finished college and went back to the vineyard as soon as I graduated, and I got a job teaching elementary school, and I taught fourth grade for 7 years, third grade for 10 years. I taught fifth grade for a couple of years. I was an assistant principal in a K-8 school. And before I retired, I became a principal. And so I was also in charge of all sorts of curriculum stuff. So that's basically how my career unfolded, and then unraveled. It unraveled when I was a principal at the end.
I wanted to talk to you about that. So ending up on Martha's Vineyard, which we'll come back to in just a second, but you were born in Katona, New York. Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, I was born in Westchester, and I grew up in Katona, New York, and
What part of New York State is that in?
it's about an hour north of New York City. It's a suburb.
Okay.
Mhm.
So it's close to big city, Manhattan and all of that, but
Yes.
probably much smaller and much calmer, which I would suspect. So Martha's Vineyard is an island. And how different was that for you, moving from basically, anywhere USA, if you will, Katona and towns like that, to an island which frankly has a lot of imagery and a lot of romanticism associated with that. Well,
Yeah.
what exactly was it that drew you to Martha's Vineyard and made you know right away, this is where I want to be?
Well, I really had not had much experience living on the ocean. And when I first got there, I was with a friend, and it was after sunset, and we were driving down the beach, and I said, "Pull over, let's go swimming." We were crazy college kids, and so we went in the water, and there was phosphorescent seaweed just illuminating the water as we
Oh, wow,
swam
okay.
around in it. And came up for air, and I said, "This is where I want to live. I want to live on this island." And I maybe made it happen. And I really think it's because I'm from New York, where I was raised to believe that if I just have the tenacity, I can do whatever I want to do,
Hmm.
because that's how New York is. It's a mindset of, all you need is strength, and you can make anything happen. So then I moved to Martha's Vineyard, and it was a little bit different there because New England is a little bit more laid back.
Yeah.
Nobody lays on their horn in New England, and not on the
Really?
vineyard anyway. And so it's a different kind of a culture, but I really liked it. I loved the community there is unbelievable. I raised my kids there. They had an incredible childhood of swimming and sailing and tennis, and lots of friends, and they played ice hockey, and we had to commute on the boat, for their hockey games in the winter over the high seas. But I never sailed. I was too busy, being a teacher and raising my kids. And that was like beat the clock. And I was on a lot of different committees. The Vineyard is very big on volunteerism,
Okay.
especially in the off season, and it's a close-knit community. So I was on all these, committees and boards, and I don't know where the time went, but I didn't have time to learn how to have a hobby. I ran to stay healthy, but that's about it.
Okay. Let me stay in your childhood for a minute because I find it fascinating that what you said is the attitude is you just have strength and determination. What was it like? What were your parents like? Tell me how that was instilled in you because and I'm doing that because I want to make the point from how you were raised and the influence that you had as a child, and then how you converted that to uh, sharing that insight and instilling that insight in 30 years of being a teacher to young kids.
Yeah, yeah. My dad was a pretty tough New Yorker, and he raised me not to be a wimp. I will say that. I think that, I never was able to get away with any kind of whining whatsoever. And if things didn't go well, it's because I didn't get ahead of whatever the problem, could have been. So he really gave us lots of experiences, and we did a lot of things outdoors. So we went camping and hiking, and
Mhm.
we had skis from yard sales, but we went skiing. We went skiing, on the weekends, and
Snow skiing.
snow skiing, yeah. And
Okay.
then my dad, with the help of his family, even the children, carrying rocks up the hill and branches out of the woods, built a house on a lake, and we did a lot of water skiing. but
Okay.
still never really sailed. And then I got into all sorts of outdoor activities, running, swimming. I did a lot of swimming, but yeah. And then I moved to Martha's Vineyard, and that's when I started getting too busy to have any kind of recreation, really.
Okay. So again, so you have that influence from your father and from your family in general, but obviously led by your dad, based on what I've heard you say. When you decided that your interest was helping younger kids, elementary school kids, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, learn how to be the best little people they could be, were you able to instill in them the no whining type of attitude that you got from your father? Were there any of those characteristics that you were able to transfer? Because it's
Yeah.
one thing to have a family telling you that, a father. It's another thing,
Mhm.
in my experience, for someone in a public school system to be trying to instill those traits. And what kind of receptivity did you get from the children, and what kind of, if any, resistance did you get from parents?
Well, I'm old enough that I started when parents were very supportive of the teachers and very supportive of the teachers uh, keeping their children to a high standard.
Yeah.
And that has really eroded over time. And so initially, I got incredible support from the families, and I had very successful students. So my students, were able to do very, very well on standardized tests, things like that. At one point, a parent came up to me at a high school graduation, and I'd had her daughter in third grade, and she said, she's never going to forget Mrs. Hammett in third grade saying, "Tears are not a strategy."
Tears are not a strategy.
Words
I
are
love
not a
that.
strategy for, like, solving a complex math problem and things like that. I always made it my business to try to get kids to be risk takers and problem solvers. That was really something that I held really valuable. And in order to do that, they had to have a certain amount of confidence, a certain amount of self-esteem, and a certain amount of trust in, the environment, and that if they were going to make a mistake, it was okay to make a mistake.
Hmm.
So, with my students, as long as they were trying something, they were okay in my book. The only way that you could be, a problem is if you weren't willing to try. So that's kind of the philosophy I grew up with, and it's something that I really think I instilled in my students. And, by the time I retired, my students had, excellent scores and everything like that. And, I think it was harder in terms of the parents, because the parents didn't want their child to fail. They were
Hmm.
very concerned that if their child failed at any level, then it would be a reputation thing. It would be, something that would define them and all of that. So parents were trying to get in the way and intervene with any potential
Hmm.
failure, which was the same as intervening with any potential learning.
Right.
Um, so that was kind of frustrating toward the end. But honestly, they're parents and it's their first go round. And, a lo- by the time I retired, I was old enough to have been the teacher of the parents. So,
Good point.
I really had a lot of patience and compassion for the parents. The hardest part for me in the end was actually the teachers union, because I thought I could make more of a difference as a principal, for a bigger population. But what I found is that the teachers union defends mediocre teachers, and also defends any kind of traditional practice. So if the administration is introducing something that's new and different and a change, there will be union pushback every step of the way, and it's almost impossible to fire a bad teacher. So, unfortunately, that's where the principal has to spend a heck of a lot of time
Yeah.
instead of spending time with the 90% of the teachers who are doing a fantastic job and, are willing to do anything for their kids. But I was, tied up in meetings about, oh, somebody had an extra 5 minutes of bus duty because the bus was late. And what are you going to do about it, principal? That's against the union contract, blah, 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 blah. So
Mm.
that kind of wore me out in the end. But because, I wasn't that kind of teacher. I never even went to the union meetings. I was too busy getting ready for my students. So, but
That's interesting, and I don't know if this is a fair analogy or not, but I'm going to put it out there just because your comments made me think of this. Oftentimes, I've worked with people who were, let's just say, a salesperson, and they're the top salesperson. So they say, you know what, you should become our sales manager. And it's a whole different function. So a lot of people that are absolutely outstanding salespeople aren't good sales managers because it's a different dynamic. And it sounds what you just described uh, made me think that maybe that your primary skill set, which you'd honed, was kind of put on the side for administrative duties.
yeah, I think the best and most successful school principals are gym teachers, guidance counselors.
Hmm.
I don't think classroom teachers are going to have an easy time, especially successful classroom teachers are going to have an easy time becoming principals because they're a threat. They
I
know how to
see.
do the job.
Okay.
They know what to look for. They know how to uh, make relevant suggestions for improvement, things like that.
Okay. So you touched on something just a moment ago, Deborah, that kind of opens up something I wanted to talk to you about. And you said, you had a parent come to you and say that their daughter from third grade, who is now graduating high school, would never forget Mrs. Hammett. Uh, I was just wondering, have you had many, if any, students come to you in retrospect and say, you know what, those things you taught me have really helped me in life?
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. I when I was an assistant principal, sometimes unfortunately there are needy families, dysfunctional families, that sort of thing, and sometimes the school has to go to court. And I was in the waiting room of the courthouse with a student and the family. And another ex-student from a long time ago happened to be sitting there nervously tapping his feet. He was in trouble for something. I don't know what he had done, but he starts chatting with me and he said, Mrs. Hammett, remember the balloons? And I couldn't remember the balloons. I'm like, what balloons? And he said, you gave me a balloon at the end of the year, at the end of the school year. You gave me a balloon, and I remember my message. And I put these little messages in the balloons, in the helium balloons for the kids on the last day of school. And the message, I told them that I created a message just for them,
Mm-hmm.
and the message was believe in yourself.
Ah,
And he remembered, and here he was probably 22 or something, sitting there. He probably had like a drunk driving, because that's all. I mean, Martha's Vineyard is mostly drunk driving,
mm,
and and he said he remembered the thing to believe in yourself.
so you said you made a message for individual for each individual. Was it the same message?
Some years I did individual messages for each student, and some years I didn't have time, so I would just say,
Yeah.
believe in yourself for everybody. But
Well, a message like believe in yourself is specific to every student if you think about it. So
yeah.
I think that's fabulous. So now let's talk about when the point when things started to kind of change, when you got to the point of your very own what's next. When you realized, okay, being a principal isn't everything it's cracked up to be. I've been doing this for a long time anyway. And in so in you, people, I encourage you to buy Deborah's book, Young Salt at 60, which you can find wherever books are sold. But part of what she says in there is, and I'm going to go ahead and read it. What if you took all that creative, badass, risk-taking energy and used it to transform your life before your body gives out? Let's face it, we could live 30 years past retirement. So with that type of mindset, when you know, okay, these chapters of my life, the section one, however you want to put it, of my life story is closing. Tell me what went through your mind and how you got to the point of what's next, and how someone who's never sailed, and you touched on it, YouTube videos and such, but talk to me about that transition, because I think that's relevant to everyone listening at any age, because we
Yeah.
all get to the end of some point, some chapter, and we have to decide and determine what's next. So share with us your thought process.
So I had always been envious of, the trust fund babies that I knew when I was in college, and they could, sort of take gap years and go and travel the world and go and learn and sail and, do these amazing things. But they had dad's credit card. I didn't have dad's credit card in my back pocket for any kind of extracurriculars when I was that age. And so I put myself through state school, and I became a teacher, and I, bought a house, and I got married, and I had 2 kids, and I did, checked all the boxes, did what I was supposed to do in life, and went to work every day, and, took care of houses and all that stuff. And when I finally retired, I thought, you know what? Now I get to do whatever the heck I want to do, and nobody's going to hold me back. So I started traveling, and, a lot of people weren't retired. A lot of people had their family commitments, this, that, the other thing. Nobody was really free. My husband didn't like to travel. He never traveled with me. And so I went to Southeast Asia, and that was during COVID, which was really
Okay.
fantastic. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh. I feel like I hit the lottery because I
Yeah.
traveled during COVID, and, the planes were empty, the airports were empty, the beaches were empty, the hotels were empty.
That's
I could
ideal.
I could name my price wherever I went. I had a scooter that I was riding around this island in Malaysia, and there was no traffic on the roads. It was awesome. And I had to come back because my passport was expiring.
Mm.
And in Thailand, it's a 30-day tourist visa, and the same in Malaysia, it's a 30-day tourist visa. So even though the whole place had been emptying out, this was March of 2020, the Chinese tourists all left, and then the Europeans left, and then the Australians left. And, I wasn't in a place where there were a lot of Americans, but whatever Americans there were had mostly left. And so I had to go because of my passport. So I got what I didn't even realize at the time was the last flight out of Langkawi Island, Malaysia,
Mm.
before that island shut down for 6 months. But anyway, I went back to the United States, and the first thing I did was I went back to the Vineyard, I renewed my passport, and I looked around for a country where I could stay for more than 30 days. So, because I
Mhm.
wanted to get out of the United States, because COVID was worse in the United States than anywhere else. And I went to the Dominican Republic, and
Okay.
and I fell in love with the Dominican Republic. So they offer you can overstay your visa and pay a tax on the way out. So it's a great deal. So
Hmm.
I met somebody there from Vermont, and I ended up divorcing my husband and moving to Vermont with this guy. And we both watched YouTube videos of sailing together. And we decided that we wanted to learn how to sail, and that would be a really fun thing to do. So we started sailing on Lake Champlain, and we took a week of lessons in the Abacos in the Bahamas to get our ASA class certifications. And that was really interesting. That was really fun. And then we bought this sailboat together on Lake Champlain. It was a lake sailboat, so I'd never seen fresh water. She was in fantastic condition. And the guy that owned the boat was from Montreal and couldn't cross the border to use the boat.
Mm.
So we got a really great deal on the boat. So, it had only been used 3 months a year, and then for 3 years it didn't get used at all. So we bought this and learned how to sail it on the lake, and then the rest is history.
Okay. That's a good stopping point because I'm not a sailor. I don't watch YouTube sailing videos. So my point is I know nothing about sailing. So when you say you started sailing on Lake Champlain, was it?
Uh,
What type of sailboat did you learn on? Was it a small catamaran, or I mean,
yeah.
how did you escalate from never sailing to taking some lessons to getting to the point of? And then I want you to describe Maeva. Is that your boat
Mavia.
name? Mavia.
Uh-huh.
I want to hear about the boat, and I want to know the origin of the name, please.
Okay. So we decided we were going to start small. We weren't going to go buy a catamaran right off the bat or anything like that, anything crazy like that. We hadn't taken lessons yet. So we went to the Lake Champlain Community Sailing Center and we borrowed a 420 for the day. And the kid at the sailing center was showing us how to rig the boat. And I didn't know what he was talking about. I didn't know what a halyard was. I didn't know what a sheet was. Thought a sheet is something you put on your bed. That's all I knew about a sheet. And, all these different things about how to rig the boat. I could not understand what he was talking about. Shackles and, blocks. And it was just foreign language to me, completely
Mhm.
foreign. And got the thing rigged and we went out there and everything was great. There was wind in the sails, we were moving, and but then it came time to go back to the marina
Ah,
and we had
uh-huh.
to figure out how to actually get someplace. And we, had to figure out that we had to zigzag to make the
Mm.
boat go back and forth to go upwind. And that was really quite a reality check because we had no idea what we were doing. So we had to, steer the boat back and forth. And we kind of learned a little bit about how to tack. We didn't flip the boat, which was great. We got back to the marina and I'm stepping off the boat to get onto the dock and I fell in the water. So that was a bit of a drama. And I felt like, I don't know if I can really do this.
Yeah.
But my partner was working during the week and I was working online, teaching online classes, but I decided I was going to go try to do it by myself. And I went out and they said, you can't take a 420 by yourself, but you can take a laser. And so a laser is a little bit of a smaller boat. It has one sail. And so I went out on the laser and the laser kept flipping and flipping and flipping. So I would
Mm.
flip and I could right it again by using the center board, by pulling with my weight, to get the
Mhm.
boat to flip back up again and climb back up on the boat. But every time I turned into the wind to change the direction of the boat flipped and I was in the water again. So I had my phone in the pocket of my life preserver. So I was able to call the marina and say, I can't get back. Somebody has to come and get me. And so they came and they got me and they towed me to shore. And I was terribly humiliated, but
Mhm.
that's okay. It was Vermont and nobody knew me. So that
And
was,
I would assume you're not the first person that was in that situation.
yeah, I'm
Uh,
just glad it wasn't,
uh,
on the vineyard
yeah.
where everybody knows me.
Oh, I get it. I
So,
get it.
so I went back to shore and I swore I'm never doing this again. I thought, no way. And then, we had some friends over for dinner and this friend says, oh, I have a sailboat on Lake Champlain. And we said, oh, you have a sailboat. And we started talking about this guy's sailboat and he took us out for the day in the sailboat. And it was a 36-foot boat, very much like the boat I have now. And totally different ball game. So we didn't flip, obviously, because it's, you can't write a boat this
Yeah.
size. And they don't flip very easily because it's a keel bolt. So it has the keel on the bottom. I learned all about a keel. And we learned how to tack that boat. And this friend of ours, showed us how to do it. And he said, this kind of boat is actually a lot more manageable than a little laser or a 420. And it seemed that way to us too. So that's when we started thinking, maybe we should buy one. So we started looking around, and that's when we found Mavia. And the name Mavia was that the boat already had that name.
Okay.
And Mavia is Queen Mavia, the Egyptian warrior queen.
Hmm.
So I thought that was kind of cool. So we
I
just
think that
decided,
suits you.
yeah.
I think that
So,
suits you quite well.
so we decided to keep it, and we had it surveyed, because when you buy a boat, you have to have it surveyed. Thank goodness, because we wouldn't have known even what to look for. And the surveyor said that the boat was in Bristol condition, mint condition. And that was great. So we made an offer and ended up buying it, and learned a lot more about how to sail it on Lake Champlain. But during the winter, before we launched it, we took those classes in the Abacos in the Bahamas and learned on a catamaran. But it was a very intensive week of learning to sail on that catamaran.
Okay. Let me just a quick point of clarification for myself, and I would assume at least a few of our listeners. When you say you learned to tack, is that the act of going back and forth in the wind to
Yeah.
go upwind? Is that what
Hmm.
tacking is?
Yep. So,
Okay.
yep. So the sail has to move across the boat. So you have to turn the boat into the wind where the sail wants to wiggle around like this,
Mhm.
because it's directly into the wind. They call that in irons. And then
Mm.
when the boat turns through the wind a little more, it catches the other side of the sail and begins to fill. And now you're on your way this way.
Okay.
So,
So now let's move ahead. Let's get to your current point. You have this boat, and currently, as we talk, as we record this, you are on board, and you are in the Bahamas.
I'm in the Bahamas right now. Mhm.
A little rainy, misty
It's rainy
day.
today. It's pretty much the first rainy day I've seen in months. Yeah. Yeah.
So help me understand. I know you have total freedom, and that's part of the reason you're doing this, but uh, what motivates you to say, okay, I'm going to stay here in the Bahamas for a day or a week or a month, and then I'm going to go? Does this just come to you? How do you plan your day and your stay and your month and your life?
Well, the thing about sailing is that it's all about the weather, and
Mm.
you can't really know what the weather is going to actually be. I mean, you can look at I have several apps that I use. I have wind apps, I have tide charts, I have navigation apps. I have to look at the distances. I have to think about the current and what that's going to do to my speed. And I have to do all these calculations to try to figure out if it's a go day or a stay day.
Hmm.
And, the worst thing a sailor can actually have is a schedule, because it's
Okay.
downright dangerous. So when
Yeah.
I first started sailing this boat down from Lake Champlain, I was teaching online and I had a schedule. So I had classes that had to be taught at specific times, and I would drop the anchor and teach the class. And then I would pull up the anchor and continue on my way and, do that. And it was really stressful, because it just added a whole nother layer of complication to all my planning. So I eventually stopped doing that. And that's when I
Mm.
decided to write the book, because I wanted to have some purpose. My purpose had always been to teach. And, when I stopped doing that, I was kind of like, wow, this is really okay. What am I doing with my life here? I'm
Mhm.
just flitting around in a sailboat without really a purpose. So
What's the
I,
point?
yes. So what's the point? So I decided, well, if I've learned how to do this, maybe other people would be interested in learning how to, make a really big change in retirement and do something that they really never dreamed of doing before. And maybe they think they're too old to learn. because the truth is you're not too old to learn. Learning, in fact, keeps us young. There's,
Mhm.
a lot of evidence that the whole process of dementia is slowed down when somebody is engaged in learning later in
Mhm.
life. So, also you have to stay healthy, but, and doing something like this makes me have to stay healthy. Like I have to be strong and strong enough to lift things, agile enough to have good balance. I can't, doctors are not readily available. I mean, if I'm at an island where there's no medical care whatsoever, I have to I have to just be more diligent about
Yeah.
preventative health
So
maintenance.
that kind of brings me to one of the reasons, and thank you so much for your time and your insights. And folks, do read this book, buy and read this book, Young Salt at 60, because what you just said, Deborah, is part of the reasons I was so happy to have you as a guest. You demonstrate that we can do whatever we want to do. We don't have to have limits. We can take an entire career and take a total shift and go in a direction that we has nothing to do with where we were. And it doesn't have to just be at retirement, everybody listening. It can happen at any time. I coach people about where are you on the ladder of success? And I came up with that because for years I had my ladder against the wrong building, I say. So
Mhm.
we can make this shift. We can be very conscious about it. It takes effort, it takes commitment, and it also takes finding what excites us. And
Mhm.
you demonstrate that so well, Deborah. And so we don't have to become sailors, but the fact that you are a sailor shows that change can happen.
Yeah, and I love what you said about, having the ladder against the wrong building, because if 10 years ago somebody asked me where I would see myself in 10 years, I would say, oh, I would really like to be the superintendent of schools. Ew, 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 ew. And, I would be having to wear the outfits every day and have all the meetings all day long and be in a stuffy old office. And oh my goodness, I never could have imagined that life would be so different and so much better than anything that I was ever even able to picture. So, yeah, but you have to be open, I think.
Mhm.
I had to be open for doing whatever's next, just take it as it comes,
Yeah.
do what's next. And sailing really teaches me a lot about how to be flexible.
Hmm. Yeah, that the way you just described it supports that 100%. So I've got two questions for you. I'm going to ask them one and then after you answer it. What did you find the hardest about the shift that you took when you decided, and it didn't sound like it was just on like a Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock, I'm going to become a sailor. It sounds like that was a bit of a process, but what was the hardest thing that you've gone through making this transition and changing your lifestyle to literally full time living on this boat?
Oh, yeah. Well, the hardest thing for me was the mechanical skills. The mechanics of the boat is something, you know, I'm a language person and a school teacher, and I can tell you anything you want to know about any elementary curriculum, but I don't know, like I didn't know how to change the oil. I didn't know what an alternator was. There's a lot of components to the boat that I have had to learn how to manage. So I've got fuel pumps and I've got bilge pumps and I've got raw water pumps and fresh water pumps. And I've got a Starlink and I have, my solar panels and I have my lithium battery system and my controller and my inverter and my charger. Oh, and I have my bathroom, which is the head, and there's constantly issues related to the plumbing, and using using the pump that's related to the head, and what else? Oh, and the autopilot and the navigation chart, the electronic chart plotter. all of those things are all new to me. So that's been the biggest learning curve
Okay.
for sure.
Yeah, that sounds like quite a bit, in particular for someone that didn't know the first thing about it.
Mhm.
Uh, Second question, what have you learned? What's the most surprising or the most intriguing thing you've learned about yourself as a person?
Mm. Well, so I always thought of myself as very accepting and tolerant, and that didn't have any biases, that I, am open to all people, all religions, all cultures, all everything. I was raised in New York and then, of course, on the Vineyard, which is a very progressive area. But as I've traveled along, I have faced my own biases that have popped up in ways that I really didn't expect. So, for example, how I perceive people who are dramatically different from me politically, or who have a different philosophy, who live in different geographical regions. And I've had to come face to face with my own bias and my own prejudices a lot, which has been great,
Hmm.
really healthy. And of course I've also encountered plenty of bias as a woman captain, solo on a boat, traveling through the southern states of America. I have encountered a lot of gender bias.
Hmm.
And it's interesting. It's just really interesting.
Okay. And you are now truly solo. I don't want to dive too deep into your personal life, but you are solo on that boat now.
Yeah, so I sail solo. I have gotten this time, because I have gotten a couple of times where I've had crew on this particular trip from Massachusetts back down to the Bahamas, and now I'm heading back north again. So I'm still in the Bahamas, but I'm in the northern part, and I'm actually waiting for a weather window where I can cross. And I did have a little bit of crew this time, but I would say 90% of the sailing that I've done since I left Lake Champlain has been solo. Yeah. And I'm
That's
solo.
really impressive. This is just so impressive, and the lessons you've given us about two things at least that I've taken from you. Number one, don't quit learning. We can always learn more. And I guess just to make it simplified is just don't quit. You know, there's something ahead of us. There is a what's next. Take the time to figure that out. So, Deborah, we're up at the end of our time, and again, I appreciate the time that you've given me, and I hope it hasn't had you miss one of your weather windows. But uh, every episode, I throw this question to my guest, and you can define it in any context, answer it in any way, shape, or form you choose. But Deborah, what's the point?
The point is that if you do spend your life working really hard and then you retire, you should go do something big with that time that you have left over, because you could have as much time left in your retirement as you did in your professional career.
Mhm.
So, what are you going to do? You could have a whole different professional career if you wanted to,
Yeah.
or you could go do something entirely different, maybe even something you never thought of before, because you have a lot of time available for the learning. So,
Fabulous. Deborah Hammett, author of Young Salt at Female Sailor up and down the East Coast of the United States of America, taking on challenges, addressing them, and just living a life that you never thought you would live, probably even 15 years ago. You're a brilliant example of how we can make the most out of life, and I thank you for sharing that, and I thank you for your time, and I thank you for writing this book. It's amazing.
thank you. Thanks for having me. And I hope more people will read the book, because I hope the reason I wrote it is to inspire people to do something big, even
Well,
if it's not
hopefully,
failing.
yeah, hopefully this show will help a few people find the book and learn from it. So thank you so much. Safe travels,
All
and
right. Thanks, Bill.
I will thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in. And if you like what you've heard, please subscribe so you don't miss an episode. We can promise there is value to be gained in every one. Taking a second to rate, review, and share the show helps make us more discoverable and enables others to find out what's the point. If you'd like to learn more about Bill Ellis and his services, please visit his website, billellis.com. See you next time.